Hello and welcome to this Politics Joe special. I'm Oli Dugmore and we're coming to you today from central London, a pub, the Harlequin. The subject of discussion, knife crime. I'm joined by Chair of the Met Police Federation, Ken Marsh, Omar Inspires, an entrepreneur and young businessman, and Elaine Donn, an anti-knife crime campaigner from Operation Shutdown. Elaine, I'll come to you first. Okay. Gangs of violent young working class people have existed across the country for centuries. Yeah. Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow. What's different about now?
This is the highest record of serious violence and murder since record keeping began in the early 1940s. Perhaps it's covered more. I think the ages are getting younger and it just appears to be getting more shocking. And even the vascular surgeons at the Royal London will tell you that they used to deal with young people and young adults, children, with one wound, and now they're dealing with multiple wounds on most cases. So the frequency, seriousness, the level of violence, and also the fact that even the police, Ken might be able to back this up, say that actually a vast majority is not gang affiliation or gang related. It's interpersonal, it's young people, it's children, adults, children.
Go on then, Ken, is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, very much so. It's changed massively what we're seeing in terms of who is carrying a knife to begin with. It's become the norm, which is a very worrying sign that someone thinks it's normal to carry a knife. And then if you look at the ageing and the ethnicities across the groups, it's across the board, and it's all sorts of age groups from the age of 10 all the way up. So it's, it's very hard to pinpoint now clearly where it is and what it is, and to say it's gang related is not the answer.
Omar, you used to carry a knife yourself. I mean, would you agree then that things have changed drastically?
Massively. So my work in schools, even primary schools now, I'm hearing about parents taking away knives from people in year 6, kids in year 5, and I'm thinking they wouldn't even know how to use a knife. But the fact that they feel they have to carry one to feel safe is the worrying thing. Back when I was young, we were just speaking to Ken a little while ago, I'd carry a knife to feel safer because I've had knives pulled out on me and on numerous occasions. It's a reaction thing. You think if I have one and I show mine, they might stop. But actually I can then go full circle. I can then become the murderer by trying to protect myself. So that's why I stopped carrying a knife a long time ago. But it's being fueled by social media, by the games that they play in. It's become something which, it's like you have your phone, your wallet, and your knife. That's how young people go out nowadays. It's like a piece of jewelry, for example. So it's horrible.
You mentioned there you didn't feel safe, and you did that check before you left the house. Like when I leave, I would go keys, wallet, phone. I wouldn't necessarily add knife to that. In fact, I've never considered adding a knife to that. And I'd probably speak for the majority of the people in this room when I say that they've probably never considered that either. I mean, make me understand how it feels to be stood at the front door feeling as if I assume there's no choice but to put that in your pocket and go out there.
Well, growing up, I grew up in a nice area, Marylebone, but there's, a couple of sides to Marylebone. And, there's people in my flat that have been stabbed, people who I played football with been stabbed, people that have died in my school from being stabbed. So growing up in an environment where you're used to facing death or violence or racial gang, fights in school, it was quite normal to have a knife. If you didn't have a knife and you were part of a gang, it was a bit like, what are you doing? Why are you not carrying a knife? At that age, you don't really think about consequences. You don't think about prison. You don't think about what would happen, or if it slipped in a fight, that knife could then stab me, someone could pick it up. You don't think like that. You just think about impulse. I'm carrying it on me. And also, you feel a bit cool, you feel strong and whatnot, but again, looking back, it wasn't the way to do things. But having friends who would encourage it, and I've seen people get stabbed in front of me a number of times, and I just think, how do I avoid this situation? Is it by carrying a knife? Is it by running away? If you run away, you're, a chicken or other words they use. So it's external validation. You're trying to fit into a group that you might not belong in, but by belonging in that group, you feel protected. They're your family. So that gang now becomes your protection.
Ken, it seems almost as if the Met Police have let this get out of their control. What on earth can you do to regain control of it?
So it's very, very difficult. You've got to look back at where we were, I think at least 10 years ago, and as we moved forward from 10 years ago to 7, 8 years ago in terms of stop and search, I think there was a massive change of that. Now, there's a lot of arguments to be had around stop and search, but I sit here as a police officer with nearly 30 years service, and I say categorically it is needed. And it's needed for several reasons, which I can gladly explain to you. And if you look at the facts and the stats around how it changed and how we stopped doing what we were doing, because comments made by the then Home Secretary, you saw the increase of certain crimes happen. Now, that's not the answer to where we are at all, but it's part of the piece of kit that we would say helps blend into where we are and how we try and eradicate what the problem is. Because if you take the last 4 months, where stop and search has been increased by about 80%, we have seen a decline in serious knife crime on the streets of London. It doesn't sound like it, it doesn't look like it, but statistically we have. And we've removed far more knives from the streets of London from use. That's a fact, it's out there. So I think we need to look very carefully at, in policing terms, what we provide on the front line, but it needs to be tied into an awful lot of other things that we're going to talk about long before you get to the point of a youth on the streets or a member of public on the streets with a knife.
I mean, people will say to you that stop and search disproportionately affects black people. I mean, black people make up 15% of the population in London, but they make up 43% of stop and searches. Omar, what's your take on the tactic?
I've had both experiences. I've had an experience where I spoke about it before in Good Morning Britain, where I was walking down Edgware Road and I was with my friend of mine who was white, I was black, and I was actually in a suit because I had an interview and he was in a tracksuit, but I got stopped and searched. And that made me think. I thought, why are they not even approaching him? When he actually was carrying a knife. But again, it was my friend, but I can't use one bad experience to judge everything, because I mean, I have 2 sons now, and in my experience, and I know because in the work that I do, stop and searches are effective. I prefer stop and searches happen, let's say start at home first. If a parent searches their child before they go out the house, that's where it starts. Maybe then school have the barriers. The streets are a different thing. So it doesn't just lie on the police's, responsibility to stop and search people. It starts at home. And I feel safer knowing that's going on, so that when my sons grow up in whichever area they live in, it'll reduce the amount of, hopefully opportunity that doesn't come their way, that they'll ever get stabbed, and everyone else's sons or daughters will get stabbed. So I think targeted searching is something that, I've spoken about quite a lot. People say most of the deaths are black on black. I can't speak on behalf of a race. I speak about my experience. I speak to all sorts of audiences from different faiths and different backgrounds. It depends on how you carry yourself. If you're not going to change the way you look, the way you talk, the way you walk on the street, you are going to fit a certain stereotype, and you are going to be targeted. So if you don't want to be targeted, change the way you do things, change your pattern, and then you'll see a difference.
Elaine, what compelled your group Operation Shutdown to take to the streets on this issue?
The completely intolerable level of violence, increase, murder that is happening on the streets. The seeing children, effectively babies, get involved. I was asked to help set it up by a bereaved mum who just feels traumatised every time she wakes up and reads the multiple incidents that we have in our news, breaking news, but breaking news would literally be a day when we don't have people die or be shot and stabbed on the streets now. So really because enough's not being done by enough people, and everybody needs to do more, and that's everybody, families, communities, police, government, elected officials, opposition, all party parliamentary groups. Everybody needs to do more because we can't tolerate this, and people are getting used to it. You look at a tabloid commentary now on social media, people are laughing, people are making racial comments and blaming it on globalisation. They're kind of saying, I suppose he was going to be a promising footballer, to the point they're actually starting to laugh when victims are dying, and they're conflating victims with perpetrators. So to go back to the question, it's intolerable. And lots of us in lots of different ways, including many of the bereaved mothers that are in our group, have been trying to do different things, setting up their own trusts and campaigns and going to schools, trying to educate young people, petitions, marches, protests, whatever it may be. And we see no change, so we just felt we had to kind of get together and see what we could do.
Two of you have touched on the importance of education there. So, Elaine, I'd like to ask you, how important is early intervention, going into schools, teaching people about this before perhaps they have access to weapons?
It's possibly about the most important thing we need to do. Why wait for something to grow and become an issue? So we're even talking about early intervention, you're talking about prevention, you're talking about pre-prevention. It just needs to be put in now with babies and toddlers. We know exactly who the groups are, the indicators that are likely to fall victim to becoming a knife carrier or ended up being at the end of that knife. And the groups can often mix because people die at the ends of their own knives. Yeah.
Omar, in 2017, no one was stabbed to death in Scotland, and a lot of people attribute that to their adoption of a public health approach, i.e. looking at causes, trying to prevent them, rather than the cure, if you like, dealing with the symptoms afterwards. How important is it that we accept and implement that down here?
I think what works there is not necessarily going to work here in the same way, but I think it's very important. I mean, they had massive success with their stop and searching as well, and they managed to bring knife crime and violence down. I think it's a different behaviour. So touching upon what was just said about the pre-prevention, for me it's about love. A lot of the friends or acquaintances I had growing up who were always angry in school. If you look back at their home life, sometimes they come from a broken family or a single parent family. They don't have a connection with their siblings or their parents. It all stems from not receiving that love, that connection, or having that. That's why they feel so obliged to have a gang, because they have that affiliation with them. So I try and, like I said, it's not about watching the fire grow and putting it out later on. Let's stop it from even becoming a fire. So I touch upon, human behaviour and basic human needs. What does that child need from that young age to understand that? Because look, no one who hurts somebody else is happy. No one stabs someone is in a good situation in their life. So for me, it's about bringing that. But in regards, going back to your question, I think it's important. We need to start acting now. I've done so many panel events and discussions, and everyone says, yeah, let's do that. But how do we actually put that into action? Because who has the power to actually switch that button and say, right, now we're going to go into this mode and actually just put this to a stop? It's hard.
Well, you sat next to the chair of the Met Police Federation, so why don't you ask him, Ken?
My views probably will be a little bit offline in terms of what I think we should do, because I am very clear where I think we should go. I think we should enforce far greater, because the problem we've got at the moment is the government are very strong on their words, but ultimately they don't want individuals to go to prison because it costs a lot of money. Now, I'm not for 1 minute going to sit here and say prison is the answer, because, as we quite rightly said talking earlier, there's all sorts of problems with prison. But in terms of policing and apprehending people who are behaving in this way, surely if the sentence is built correctly for what you've done, you'll have a blooming good think about what you're doing. Because the legislation is in place if you're caught with a knife. But do we ever give the correct sentencing on it? No, we don't. Why don't we? Because we don't want that individual to go to prison. Now, if we start doing that correctly and we start enforcing correctly what is put in place, then I'm sure people would start thinking very carefully about what they do and how they do it. Because I'll give you an example. When the legislation was brought in for handguns, how many people do you see with handguns? Not many, I can assure you. There are a few that you hear of, and there's few instances of a shooting. But it's very rare on the streets of London or in the UK for handguns, because the sentencing is there and it's 5 years, bang, off you go. Simple as that. Now, we start looking at it correctly in terms of how we're dealing with our individuals who are carrying knives. I'm all for giving them a chance or an opportunity. I'm not the person who just wants to slap the cuffs on them and throw them away, because everyone can make mistakes. But once that hurdle's been taken once, we've then got to act. We've got to act firmly and very clearly so that we can start getting on top of what the problem is. Otherwise, and I can assure you of this because I see it, they laugh when they come out of the courts. They think it's funny. Well, that cannot be the answer. Our job is to get them there as the 30,000 cops on the streets of London. But how do you think my colleagues feel when we get them there and the next day they're back doing what they were doing? That's not the answer.
Elaine, do you think the police response has been adequate?
I think they've done what they can, considering their hands are tied, considering the cuts they've faced. I think 28,000 in London. I read today something that Ken had written that said 76% of the budget spend is on staff, so 24% on the salary. So I think they are in an enormously difficult situation. I think it's quite unfair, to be honest with you. They did try and warn the then Home Secretary Theresa May. They were told they were crying wolf. But these police officers, they've signed up to do a role. They didn't sign up to a role to be under pressure, to be understaffed, to have their annual leave cancelled, to work, in a situation where actually they can make mistakes. And these people are the often the first person at the scene of a serious violence incident and a murder, and often the ones that are providing first aid to these people and go through an awful lot themselves. So I think the police are doing what they can. The police should always be scrutinised. We should always scrutinise everything. Everybody we should be scrutinising. But I think their hands are tied, and I also believe that they are in a difficult position because not all of them can speak out on how they feel about what's been done to the police service with cuts and with restructures as well.
So if we accept then that police numbers are lower, where does the burden fall? Does it fall on parents? Should they be taking more of a role in, even stopping their children going out? What's the answer?
Well, I think central government can look at police cuts and look to reinstate the numbers. I think that's the first protocol because, yes, of course, most parents would say they could try and do more. It's not that simple. I'm a single parent. I've got 2 daughters. It's not that easy to try and stop your child leaving the house. And I've been through that myself when my daughter was a pain. She decided she wanted to leave and the police said, I can't lock her in. She was 14 years old. Are you literally telling me that my house rules mean nothing because the law tells me if I try and lock my child in, it's false imprisonment? So I think, yeah, of course, all of us can look back and examine and say, can we do more as a parent? Parents should be checking their kitchen drawers. Parents should be checking their children's mattresses. My friends do, who have children that are borderline behaviour and some of them they suspect are being groomed. But everybody can do more. This is the thing, and we're trying to look, offer binary choices or one factor or not. We're going down the wrong path. It's very complex and all of us need to work together. This is why Glasgow was successful. That came from Boston. The World Health Organization says the same as the research in Honduras and Johannesburg and everywhere they've had violence. It says the same thing. There's no magic solutions. It's a multi-agency approach that is well-funded and holistic. And Ken will probably agree. Recently, we'd met with some people from the Serious Task Force, and they said this can't be solved without communities stepping forward and saying we need help, or we're ready to do something now. We're going to rise up and do something, but hey, we can't do it by ourselves in isolation.
Omar, what could your parents have done, if anything, to stop you from making the decision to join a gang?
I can't fault my parents. They were there. There was always food at home for me, always a bed there. This is nothing. I was raised really, really, really well. This was just my own decision. Because when I came home, my pants came back up, my tie was up. I left the house, a different story. I made the decisions by myself. But for other people who didn't have that, I can understand. I can understand why they did what they did. But for me, it was a different case. For me, I was wanted to fit in. In my school, sometimes it was really bad. You had like the blacks here, then you have the Kurds and the Bangladesh. And as a black Muslim, I kind of fit across everywhere. I could kind of talk to the Kurds and relate with them in that way, and then have the blacks. But I didn't know where my loyalties were when there was a fight. And I was like, well, where do I stand? So I always felt troubled and confused with my own, appearance and who I was. My dad was great. My mum, they were always there for me. So I can't say from my own experience they could have done any more. Everything was hidden. Kids nowadays can hide things very, very, very well. I've got, my 4-year-old even can hide stuff from me and I have no idea physically, but in terms of hiding lies or hiding things around the house, there's always a way. Things being hidden in bushes or in tyres in the streets and whatnot. So kids are very resourceful.
Particularly when there's time away from supervision, adults, parents. How important are things like after-school services in that sense?
I say extremely important. So I was quite lucky. So when I was growing up, we had youth centres. And I know for a fact they worked because where I went, when we had the dance studio, the music studio, all that kind of stuff, there were 3 rival gangs who would go there and they would all make music together, would play, foosball together, play snooker together. There was never a fight within the youth centre. When we go out, maybe we'd create a problem for each other. But when we're on that site, we were just teenagers. We were just people that had common ground, common interests, and we just got along. So the whole thing about, there's not enough funding for it, or there's not enough people that want to work. I can find people, volunteers, 50, 100 people who will say, I'll work in the youth centre for free. They are out there. So I think we need to, if schools can keep their gates open for longer, just let them play football in the playground. I don't know how they can do it, but I think the resources are there, but I don't know who holds the decision of, locking it all up at all. So
we actually have a school teacher here.
Yeah, so it's related to the report that came out yesterday, the day before, by the all-party parliamentary group on knife crime, which linked cuts in youth services. On average, councils have had their reductions by 40%, and that's led to an even bigger reduction in youth services. Obviously, with differences across the country. But my question is with that report and with there was a Home Office report that kind of acknowledged that there may have been some impact through austerity measures. So would you agree that unless we do reverse those austerity measures that have taken place over the last 10 years, then we won't be able to prevent knife crime in the future? Do you think that we fundamentally need to reverse all the austerity measures in order to prevent, not only stop it now, but to prevent future generations from going down this route? And if I may, just quickly, related specifically to like neighbourhood policing, because what I think, in my personal opinion, I'm sure you've got obviously a much more authority to speak, but I think when we're talking about the community working with the police and kind of touching on stop and search, there is a fundamental distrust between the police and many, many communities. And I think the reduction of neighbourhood policing, even amongst the parents, the parents would be able to know, not necessarily, by first name basis or very friendly, but they'd know that police officer. It's a familiar face. Even if they don't know the name, they know that face, and they'd feel more trusted to say, I'm worried about my child. But I think that complete distrust in the community, partly because of the taking away of neighbourhood policing and then the race disparities within stop and search, has led to that. And I don't think stop and search will be effective until we have that trust rebuilt. And it takes, I believe, the key missing link is that neighbourhood policing.
Go on then, Ken.
Would you agree with that?
So I would agree 100% in terms of community policing, and if David Blunkett did one thing right in his tenure as Home Secretary, he brought in PCSOs and community policing and pushed it forward. I find it very upsetting that they've broken their promise in relation to it, because that is the bedrock. You're absolutely right, and police officers would tell you that, because I can cast my mind back to swinging the lamp when I was a home beat officer in St Anne's, Tottenham, and I got to know an awful lot of people, and I was out there every day walking about. This was 20 years ago, and it does make a huge difference. So you are completely right, and if we could do one thing, is to bring back community policing, because then, if I may, the second part to that, stop and search, which you picked up on, that buys into what we're saying about community policing and taking the communities with us. And we need to do that. But what I would say is, we've got to start looking that way rather than that way, because policing is so different from the day I joined 30 years ago, when there was an element of racism, there was all sorts of problems built in. I do not believe that is the same culture within policing now. I can say that hand on heart. We are so different. I'll give you an example. When I joined, there were 220 BAME officers in the Metropolitan Police out of 30,000. There's now 6,500. Now, that's still not enough, and we're still going to move in the right direction, but we're moving massively. Another massive thing that's come in is body-worn cameras. That's a massive piece of kit, because that gives every member of public an opportunity to question what happened to them and why it happened. So we are taking every opportunity we can to move in the right direction. But you're 100% right. You have to have the communities with you to make yourself go forward in the correct way. And I'm all for increasing that.
Ken, you said the Met Police has moved away, but is less, the word you described it as racist. How do you explain then the disproportionately high numbers of stop and search instances happening to black people?
So if you look at the stabbings that are taking place, the predominant number are black youths. That's a fact. If you look at the numbers of deaths in London, predominantly they're black youths. So when we also look at the areas that are being targeted and the youths that are being stopped, they are large groups of black youths who are out there. And I'm not going to apologise for that as the police, because if it stops one person being stabbed, I'm a parent, there's parents all sitting around us. If we can stop one individual, I'm really not interested in who we're stopping, because we can justify it with go-wise and the reasons that we've stopped that individual, whatever creed or nationality they are. We need to move away from that, because all that does is hinder what we're doing. If it's done incorrectly, then you've got an argument, and that can be dealt with. Or if we've done something that is disproportionate, it can be argued. The cameras can deal with it and everything that goes with it. But just to wheel out stats that you are stopping more black males than whites, if we are, we are. But if we're stopping people being killed, then I'm all for it.
Well, I'd probably counter you by saying that I think it would be more helpful to look at things like perhaps school expulsions or children in social care.
Absolutely.
Which I think, represent a far higher number of people who are in young offenders institutions or in prison, when perhaps blackness isn't necessarily, ever the common denominator, to be honest with you.
Agree. I'm not going to disagree with you, but I speak in policing terms, and if you talk in policing terms in what we're trying to do, we are hamstrung most of the time. We are disproportionately controlled in terms of the numbers we've got in what we have to do. So we've got to target, we've got to move out there, we've got to try and encroach upon what the problem is, because we haven't got the answers to everything. People seem to think we haven't, and we're trying desperately to deal with what's put in front of us. I've got colleagues who go to work on a 10-hour stint and deal with 1, 2 or 3 stabbings in a day. People who go to war don't deal with that, but my colleagues are being asked to do that daily. And it's a very, very difficult scenario that they're faced with. So we've got to deal with what's put in front of us and keep moving forward.
Elaine, you were nodding along there. What's your take on this?
There has been problems with certain communities, working class, Irish, black communities for quite a long time now. I accept that there's been a lot of changes. I think that still is a significant issue, and it might be something that can be still worked on in the short, the mid, the long term to improve these community relationships, because if people trust the police, whatever background or skin colour they come from, or class or creed, it doesn't really matter, then we can try and ensure that some of these crimes are solved, because I believe that a very low rate of these murders are being solved, which is abhorrent. So if we've got over 1,000 murders in the last year and a half, that's probably about 900 murderers walking around the country scot-free, or at least they are to date. Lots of families that can't move on in terms of grieving and any form of justice. Stop and search. We obviously still need to look at a best practice. There is obviously, the police have a best practice model of stop and search. I think it would be good for us to look at that. I think there needs to be sometimes more accountability with certain instances between the police and the community. And I think that might help in the mid to long term to help certainly help people be able to report to the police. People don't feel safe to even report. Within our communities and where I am in Camden and the boroughs that I know and I work with, most people have the feeling that most people in the community know who the murderers are, and people do not speak out. So whilst we have got community and policing relationships that could be better, that shows to me there's a lot of room for also helping with the justice element, not just catching people and making sure there's good customer service. They need good customer service with stop and search, and it needs to be kind of demonstrated and challenged. And of course, some police officers might have a far from perfect method, but I do think that if you put police officers under a lot of pressure still, and they don't have leave, and they're tired, and they've probably got PTSD from seeing multiple stabbings, and I think the likelihood of stop and search going wrong and worse practice stop and search is going to be more frequent, and it's a big mess.
In terms of stop and search, I think it's about 10% of items seized are usually knives, bladed items, pointed items. The other thing that's often seized are illegal drugs. To what extent, I'd like to come to you on this, Omar, to what extent do you think you can blame middle-class drug users who are essentially providing the demand that the gangs supply?
I don't know how we can. They are funding it. They are the people who they sell to. They keep the economy for them going. But the people who fall are the not, I say they're innocent because some of them are just trying to raise money to help their parents. They're doing it in the wrong way, but they come from a broken or they're suffering at home, and some of their intentions are just, I'm going to start selling a little bit just to help my parents get by. So that's what I mean by innocent. That they're selling the wrong stuff, but there's never in my experience of growing up, they're not punished, because I've seen lawyers and bank managers and all sorts buying this stuff, and they use it. Teachers, on every level, they use it. Whether it's weed, whether it's sniffing. But what happens to them? Some of them are high in teaching kids. Are schools going to be drug testing their teachers, or everyone's looking at the guy on the street, the foot soldier? But actually, who's in more need? He is. He's not. I applied for 50 jobs, and I know it's 50 because I printed it out, and I had to pay my school to print it out for me. It's a long story, but I applied for all those jobs, and no one got back to me. And I dressed properly, and I just wanted an opportunity, but I don't know why I didn't get the job. But I wasn't badly spoken, I wasn't badly dressed. I just said, most of them said, you don't have enough experience. I said, well, it's a great observation. I just finished school, but why don't you be my first point of call? So the next person who said that to me, I can say, well, actually, no, I've had a year here. now let me move on. But nobody wanted to give me that chance. So when I'm pushed against, back against the wall, and someone says, Omar, do you want to make a little bit, well, not a little bit of money selling drugs, but do you want to make some money doing this? It's an option for a lot of people. And then it becomes a culture, then a lifestyle. So then people can't get out.
Thanks for that. Karen, could we take your question, please?
My question basically is, what are we going to do about the witnesses, witness protection? As you've just said, there's a lot of people on the street that know who's done the murders. In my particular case, I've hit the wall of silence, and that is usually the reason why most of these cases are not being solved. And I believe we should start to look at a system where we can bring the witnesses forward to clean up the streets, bring these murderers to justice. And then the other side of it for me is this: the police go out and do their job. They bring the people to justice. Then the CPS lets us down as families. They bring someone to justice. They go into court. It's obvious they've committed a murder. They've premeditated it. They've loaded themselves with a knife. They've gone out that day to use that knife, whether they said, oh, it's for protection or not. Majority of people don't carry knives. It's only 1% that are carrying knives. And then when they do go to the courts, they're given sentences of 7, 8 years max. That's an insult to anyone that's lost a child, an absolute insult. It should be a life for a life sentence of 28 years minimum, served to the day. No good behaviour let-offs or anything. So when are they going to wake up and make people pay for the crime, like you said at the end here, you said it, make the sentence fit the crime. That's what I'm calling for.
So, Ken, to recap, witnesses, a wall of silence being met by people. How on earth do we go about confronting and dealing with that?
Well, I think you're very eloquent how you put that across, because I think you answered most of it yourself. It's not rocket science what we're talking about. It's very, very straightforward, and we need to understand why we're in the position we're in, because as quite rightly has been said, the police will do the best they can to get the individual to point of. Now, what I don't understand is the bit about why the wall of silence comes up to the degree it does and how we can't break that down. You may well be able to answer some of that. But in terms of policing, when we know who the individuals are and we need to get the correct evidence to go forward, the correct statements, as you quite rightly say, then it needs to be brokered so that it can be easier. The system can be easier, because it becomes so bureaucratic in terms of how it's moved forward, and so difficult for individuals to understand what they need to do, to understand how they're going to be looked after and taken forward with the process, that, as you quite rightly say, by the time it gets to the CPS, good luck, because it will be changed into 10 different myriads and brought out in any way they want it to be. And what we're left with is derisory sentencing. And derisory sentencing, as I've said at the beginning, and you're quite right about murder, throw away the key as far as I'm concerned. It's as simple as that. Because if people got that clear message, and you look at the sentencing in America, it's way and above. You can have 1 or 2 little nips, and then bang, you're on 45 years. It's totally different. This comes back to the government not wanting to put people in prison because it costs a lot of money. Well, we've got to change the culture, because if we're going to say it fits the crime, and to fit the crime, 7 to 8 years is not fitting the crime at all.
Can I just challenge that point about not putting people in prison? Because we seem quite ready to fine homeless people £100 to put them in prison. So there seems to be a complete kind of prioritising wrong, because people are still in prison for a non-payment of council tax, non-payment of TV licence, for poverty practically. So those people will be put in, but yet there seems a reluctance from government and people that can change the justice system to actually give more proportionate crimes for the more serious crimes, paedophilia and rape and murder and these type of things. So it seems so much disproportionality.
But they're long sentences, and the things you're talking about are 20 days, 15 days, 30 days. They're very, very short, and it's not right. It's not the answer, and you're quite right in saying,
surely
why
they're
on
not
earth
cost
are they
effective, are they?
It's
They
not
can't
cost
be.
effective, but I'm talking about 10, 15, 20 years, and I'm talking about a lot of people.
Yeah.
And you'd have to build 10 more prisons. It's as simple as that.
Well,
And they
why
don't want to do
don't
that.
we build the 10 more prisons?
Well,
I would challenge you guys on this. I'm not sure if the American justice system is one that we want to be
No, I'm not
replicating.
saying for 1 minute. I'm talking about the sentence.
It doesn't
absolutely.
prove as a deterrent. It proves as a proportionate punishment. Okay, there's no evidence to say that a life sentence or things like corporal punishment, this type of thing, necessarily prevents it. So to me, I think we should stop looking at it as a deterrent preventative and look at it as a form of justice that suits the actual crime, because it's hard to find tangible evidence that say it deters people.
That's
in
absolutely
fact,
the
in
case.
America, it looks like the reverse.
That's what I was going to raise with you. I
Yeah.
mean, that there aren't studies to support the fact that harsh sentencing decreases offending rates. In fact, it actually appears that harsh sentencing has no impact whatsoever.
Yeah.
Looking at a study by...
I totally disagree with that,
Sure.
because years ago we did a campaign on all the media about drinking and driving. Drinking and driving. The government wanted it to be stopped. They'd done a big campaign on it. Now everybody thinks before they get in their car about having a drink. So why don't we do a big campaign, the same thing about knife crime? Make that sentence fit that crime, because what they did when they did the drinking and driving, they made it that you lost your job, you lost your livelihood, and you lost your home basically if you didn't have a livelihood. So therefore, why aren't we doing that with knife crime?
The way I see in the media, these boys, the way they're behaving, the way they beat the police, I think that the police, they need a good training. I think there's lack of training for the police. And I believe that what I see, because the police don't have gun or training, and I believe also maybe the police, they need help for the army, because the country they are terrorists in the street, the killing, the stabbing, innocent. So I think the army have to help the police, because you need help. That's what I think.
Is that where we're up to? Sorry, go on then, Omar.
I was going to say, I agree. So I was in Kenya a while ago, and I saw some confrontation between police and everything. And when people look at the police officers, they look down. They don't even look in their eyes. There's that fear and respect they have for them. But if we had that here, so look, I've been roughed up by some police officers, but I deserved it. It's fine. But number one, I don't think police are paid enough to be dealing with what they're dealing with nowadays, because getting out the vans and cars stoned and all sorts. And the second that in this country you touch someone, it's, it's sexual harassment or something. There's a lot on their shoulders. But in terms of the training and aspect of getting the army involved, there has to be a bridge between the respect that young people have for the police and even for adults nowadays. Because I work in primary schools where there's kids telling teachers to shut up and all sorts, and teachers are getting slapped by kids, and I think that never happened when I was young. So what's happened to this generation right now? So I'll let you carry on, because you're there. But
it's a real difficult one, because we police by consent. We don't police by force.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference. A lot of countries that we talk about police by force. The first thing they do is pull the gun out. Well, let's take the Met as an example, because we're in the Met and I'm the representative for the Met. 30,000 cops. 11% are armed. So that's about 3,500. My wife's an armed sergeant in the Met. So that's a lot of armed officers in the Met to deal with an awful lot of things that you probably don't see on a daily basis, but they're being dealt with. So that's that bit in relation to armed. And I think we've got that right. I personally don't want to see mandatory arming of police officers. I think once you go down that path, you police by force. Yeah. And that's a completely different world you're taking us into. I don't want to see that. You might have a view on that, but we'll come back to that. So that's that bit, the armed side. Then we talk about the rest of my colleagues who are out there. They're adequately skilled in what they're being asked to do in terms of their PPE, their personal protection equipment, what they've got on them. We now have mandatory tasers. We have all sorts of things that they have the ability to deal with individuals. And I think, again, we've got that right to a certain degree, and body-worn cameras on every single uniformed officer. But here's the scratch to what I'm talking about. You saw what took place 3 weeks ago, where people were lying around. There was a pink boat. I thought I was on something when I came out of Oxford Circus. There was a pink boat in the middle of the road. Well, these individuals, I went very public on media, television, everywhere. How do you deal with them? They were quite happy to be arrested. They didn't want to have any form of confrontation with the police. They went completely limp when my colleagues tried to move them. If we'd have started being heavy-handed with them, I can assure you what the headlines would have been. Bully police, tactics to beat people up, it would have gone on and on and on. So we took the decision in policing terms deal with it was put in front of us, to carry them away and be as gentle as we could. Not one officer was done for any sort of assault of an individual during that period, but the public were getting restless with it. So you have to answer the question for yourself, how do you want us to police? Because if you want us out there forcefully dealing with what's put in front of us, become an MP and change legislation, and then things can change. Because at the moment, we have to get the balance right, because we are scrutinised, quite rightly. I've no problem with scrutiny of policing, but we are scrutinised to the nth degree. And I have trainee constables starting in the Met on £21,000 a year. No disrespect to McDonald's, but you can get that serving burgers. And look what a cop is asked to do on a daily basis for £21,000 in London. It's degrading. So that's the police service you've got.
Elaine, what do you think? I mean, arming police officers, that sounds a lot, again, like the US justice system, which is not something I think we particularly want to replicate. What do you think of that?
Pegu and other mums who've lost their children, and many people are now saying, well, actually, why don't we try this, okay? And because nothing else seems to be working, people are dying every day, getting younger and younger, all the stuff that we've said. So the longer it's left, the more that people are going to actually feel, there's all sorts of emotions that are going on. People feel de-skilled, they feel frustrated, they feel sad, they feel shocked. Still, most people. And so what people are suggesting now is other ways, such as the army, because it seems like a really plausible idea to make people safer. I've kind of tried to think about how the army could help. So first of all, I understand it would change the relationship between the police and the state massively and citizens, so that's one thing. First of all, we haven't got enough armed forces at the moment to actually do their job in this country, and that's to do what they do regularly as part of the armed forces. Secondly, I just think, how are they going to figure it out? Are we just going to stick them on council states and kind of have that sort of perhaps quite discriminatory way of dealing with it? Because it can happen on a high street, it can happen on a bus, it can happen on a train. So how are we going to figure out? And if the army are there, are they going to be pointing guns at people? And is that going to end up with civilians being shot quite easily? And then what we see in America is that civilians will start, because we know there's guns everywhere. I know they do, because I go to safer neighbourhood meetings. There's submachine guns being raided from the house 2 doors down from me. So I know that guns are everywhere, but they're not quite using them yet. As soon as the police or the army or a militarised state comes out, then I think we would then see that I would be interested in seeing unemployed veterans be trained to do the cure and disrupt model of doing detached work on the streets like they do in America, which has been proven to work. It's highly skilled, highly dangerous work, but I'd rather see former army personnel deployed that way quite immediately to get out there and actually do that quite difficult work that people that think needs to be done. Because at the end of the day, we're dealing with children that can't walk to the shop and can't go to school. And we're trying to protect them. So people are coming out with these suggestions because it's been left to fester.
How on earth have we got to a point where we're talking about deploying the army against our own children?
It's been left to fester. It's been left to fester, and people's emotions are overspilling. If you're somebody who's lost a child, a loved one, a partner, a relative, and your daily waking up is more children, the feelings inside you, apart from your own anxieties, is, can you imagine how that feels? And they know full well how these newly unsuspecting bereaved families are going to feel immediately. They know exactly what they're going to go through, the injustice, the struggle, the obstacles, the mental health, the financial problems. So, of course, people are going to start to come up with things. I mean, now people are starting to suggest some really quite extreme violence, vigilantism, because it's been left to fester. So this is a natural thing for humans to do when they feel sad, shocked, upset, angry, de-skilled. Of course, it's to me that's even further negligence on behalf of the government to allow people to feel this way and still not act.
Just quickly, Omar, there seems to be a bit of cognitive dissonance here, really, for me, because we're talking on the one hand about the importance of community policing and police embedding themselves well within communities, and on the other hand, we're also talking about arming them and sending the army potentially into those communities. I mean, how do you reconcile those two things?
I think they're quite separate. I mean, so when I was growing up, we always had the officers, like you got in what you mentioned. You could actually go and talk to them. You don't feel like they're going to stop and search you there and then. You can actually tell them a problem and they were there for you. I think we're very far removed from that right now. But having the army on the streets is a very drastic call. But in the 2 years I've been kind of doing what I'm doing right now, and everyone keeps saying, what's the next steps? When is the army going to be that next step? It might be the answer. It might be we have to go into, Operation Z or whatever they want to call it, but to kind of lock down the streets. Or, I don't know, it's going to take something drastic from all levels of the community You know, whether every employed person does go to work for one day. Something has to happen where it gets the right people's attention, because the people I think who've allowed this to fester have not been affected by it. They live in certain parts of London that have certain cushy jobs where this stuff is not affecting their kids or their cousins or X, Y, and Z. So they've just been living their life. But now it's starting to catch up. Everyone's like, okay, wait a minute. Social media is playing its own role and we can see everything online now, every single hour something's happening. But the fact that it's been left so long to almost marinate it's become a huge problem.
I think, just picking up on that, I think the most poignant thing recently was the young girl, white girl, and I say white because she had a Girl Guide uniform on.
Jodie Chesney.
And all of a sudden, the media went absolutely ballistic about it. We'd never heard so much about knife crime just on that one incident that took place purely because of that. So it resonates, and it's factually correct what you've just said. You know, people need to wake up across the whole of the country as to what is happening here, because it's spreading, and it's not an individual thing. It's going to be everyone.
And Clayton Prince was murdered outside a school in broad daylight
Absolutely.
years ago. It's not broad daylight. Young people and even females, it's not a new thing. Tanisha was shot in the face last year. That didn't provoke the same public outrage. But I think the most important thing is whatever gets the public to take note is got to be a good thing, right? For people to understand how bad this is and how it can happen anywhere to anyone.
I agree.
All right, let's go for another question. Kay, would you like to ask something?
The question I'd like to ask is, why is the police and the CPS not working together? They are not working together. The police go and do their job, and I'm talking about murder, particularly murder. My son was murdered in 2017, when it's a group. So when it's a group of young people that have stabbed the victim and killed them, the police work tirelessly to get the perpetrators to court or to the CPS. The CPS seem to be reluctant now to do anything around joint enterprise, absolutely anything, yeah? They will either, if they've got enough evidence against one individual out of that group, the one individual stands trial for that crime and is incarcerated if the outcome is a guilty verdict for murder or manslaughter. There's cases where mothers are losing their children. There is more than one person involved, and one person has gone to prison, although the evidence does point that there was other people involved. And what I'm being told by the police is they gather all the evidence and the CPS knocks them back and says there's not enough. So why are they not working together, hand in hand, to make sure that justice is served for those bereaved families when their loved one has been killed by not just one person, a group of people?
Ken, just before you respond as well, in your answer, could you explain for everyone joint enterprise laws, exactly what that means?
So it's a very, very difficult one, this one, because in terms of joint enterprise laws, then the legislation is laid down very clearly, and that's why it becomes so difficult in policing terms, because as you quite rightly say, and again, you've made such a valid point, the police do everything they can to get an individual also connected, joint enterprise. So whoever the perpetrator was, if there were 10 people watching, they're as guilty. That's what we're talking about. So when we come forward to get the evidence and we cite, hypothetically, 15 people with one person who administered the stabbing, the 15 should be charged for the offence, précis, together. But CPS are not part of the police. The police put their evidence to the CPS and the CPS make the charging decision. That's where the problem is, because whatever we put forward, they will look for the avenue to get a prosecution. That's not the answer, because as you quite rightly said, you'll end up with 1 or 2 people when you should have 10 or 15. I agree with you 100%. I don't have the ability to change that, but that is the fact of what takes place, what you've actually highlighted here. happens all the time, and we see it in all sorts of offences because it's far easier to take it forward and do a deal to make sure that they get a prosecution at the end of the day, and they'll turn around and say, well, we got the person who did it, so that's okay. That's not okay. That's not the answer. You need to have every individual, and this comes back to what we were saying about who's responsible for what happened, because the rest of them are laughing and thinking, well, that was pretty easy, because at the end of the day, if we don't administer the actual knife into the individual, then nothing's going to happen to us. It's wrong. It's completely wrong. And unfortunately, and I'm not sitting here pious, but we are not responsible for that in terms of policing. We take forward the evidence, and the CPS make the decisions, and they make it easier for themselves to take it forward for a prosecution.
Omar, anything to add to that?
Not on this one. Yeah, no, really. I don't have a lot of experience or encounter anything with the CPS, so no.
All right, perfect. Elaine?
Just reminds me when this so-called happy slapping phrase came out. At the time I was volunteering with the youth offending team in Camden, and so we did deal with young people on a restorative justice level, and that ended up including when that so-called craze came out, which is assault basically. The person that also filmed it became one of the assaults, and there's various forms of assault. You can have an emotional assault if you write something quite disgustingly racist or about someone, that's considered an emotional response. So to me, I kind of understand that, because I remember when I went to school, and after school we had a fight, and 100 school children would come around and chant, literally, and the two children would fight, but without that whole crowd around it, those two children might have been more likely to say, well, actually, do we really want to have a fight? But they'd built an audience like a gladiator stadium. So I think we do need to look at, I know there has been some miscarriage of justice with joint enterprise, but I think in general, if there were 6 people together and 6 people have chased down a person, stabbed them, we'll stop looking at the person that produced the weapon, look at what they've done as a person and the impact they had on that person before they killed them. They terrified them. It took a whole pack of them, a gang of them to chase them down, kill them. The odds were against them, and then afterwards, because just getting one of them that got the knife isn't good enough, because they were part of it. The person that didn't pull the knife might have been the person that said, go and stab him. So, you know, it doesn't seem right and it doesn't seem right just to get one and hopefully that will keep the family happy. That's not right either.
What they're doing is empowering the ones that don't get caught to go out and do it again.
Yeah.
Because from the kids in schools that I teach, when I do knife crime workshops, the kids themselves say, it don't matter, miss, because we're not going to get caught because there's no police to catch us. So, you know, and then when someone does get caught and 5 get let go, for example, those 5 are then empowered to go back out and commit the same crime, thinking that only one of them is going to get caught. And that's why we have the repeated offences. They keep repeating the offences. And a decision made more than once like that, that is a decision, it's not a mistake.
But what I don't understand is your objective is justice, okay? And both of you, the CPS and the police, is justice. So there needs to be something to bridge that, okay? So you're working together so that at the end of the day, you can't bring my son back, but you can at least give me a little bit of satisfaction that every single person that was involved.
I agree with you, 100%. I'm not disagreeing at all. And you're quite right. I don't have the answer to it, but I know exactly what you're talking about, and it happens all the time. And that needs to change. I don't have the power to do that, but I would suggest we start talking to MPs and people who do, because they're the people that make the legislation and take it forward.
Yeah. Legislation needs to change as well, that when they make a no comment statement, wasting police valuable time as well, that shouldn't be allowed. They should have to
used as a
prove,
deference now.
Yeah, but they should have to prove that they're innocent, not the other way around. Shouldn't be your job to prove that they're innocent. It should be their job to prove it. And stop wasting valuable police time, valuable court time. Stop wasting people's time. Let's deal with them how they dealt with our children.
Ken, would you be willing to work with Operation Shutdown in the future going forward after what you've heard here today?
Well, absolutely, and I do now, but it's a very, very difficult scenario that I don't have the answers to. I know fully what you're talking about because I've had this explained to me so many times, and I understand it completely. But ultimately, the CPS have to fight. We don't have any say in what the CPS do and how they make their charging decisions. The police do not. There is, as you quite rightly said, a buffer. Now, that's the bit that needs to be looked at, and that's the bit where legislation needs to change around that so that we can say, right, we've got this scenario laid out, we've got the individuals, they all go forward and they are all treated for the same offence. Let them then stand in a court with a jury sitting there to make the decision on who did what, why and when. And then you'll get the correct sentencing in relation to, yeah, you might have administered the knife, but you were there, so you'll get 60% of that sentence, etc., etc. That's what doesn't happen at the moment, and that's what should happen.
It's, I think, a good point to draw an end to things because it sort of demonstrates simultaneously the nuance, the despondency and the terror of this issue, and also that perhaps there aren't always straightforward answers. I'd like to thank every member of our panel for being here today, the audience and also the Harlequin for hosting us. Thanks very much, everyone. I really appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you.
Go on, Martin. Yeah, we'll have a round of applause.